Hey everybody, Ryan Doyle at the Verdigris Table, where we are helping game masters prepare to run Menace Under Otari. And last time we talked about some basic prep for starting a new tabletop role-playing game in a group. We went over a couple story seeds worth planting that could blossom after you finish with this first level adventure. You don't have to watch that video before this one, but I would circle back afterwards because there's some good info in there for new and experienced game masters running the Pathfinder Second Edition Beginner's Box. We are going to go through this dungeon room by room now because it does an excellent job teaching the players the mechanics of the game, but it's also a fantastic primer in adventure design for Pathfinder, Dungeons and Dragons, just about any game you might run in the future. So let's get into it. Room 1. We are heading to the basement beneath the fishery, and we're going to fight some giant rats. And this is a classic level 1 adventure trope, almost a rite of passage for new adventurers. The very first lesson I'm going to draw from this is that you do not have to tie yourself up in knots, reinvent the wheel with every adventure, every encounter. The classics are classic for a reason, and people respond to familiar scenarios and can imagine themselves in them with a lot less effort. You want to throw some weird and wonderful stuff at the players that they've never seen before? Great. Just know you don't have to do that all of the time, or even most of the time. It depends on the players, and it even comes down to like the kind of day they've had, but a lot of people just want to immerse themselves in familiar concepts because they're more interested in the uniqueness of their characters. Give the people what they want, and the people want to smash big giant rats. Uncomplicated enemies that are just there to be slain is a great way to kick things off and give a little demonstration of the combat system. But before we do that, we do get a beat of exploration in this room. It's good to build that tension a little bit. Everybody knows something is down in that hole, and it's just a question of, is it going to come out to attack us, or is it going to wait until we go in there? Exploration is one of the 3 main modes of play in Pathfinder 2E, and I kind of view them as like different levels of focus, only instead of zooming in and out in space, we are zooming in regards to time. In combat, which is coming, and we're definitely excited about that, every moment matters because life and death are on the line. Each round of combat lasts 6 seconds, and actions are resolved in initiative order. That's what's on those reference cards, a lot of the rules, and I'd say the majority of the character's abilities fall into this mode of play. The second level of focus is exploration, and we zoom out for measuring things in 6-second increments to 10-minute chunks. And these are abstractions to make the whole thing function as a game, so I recommend just don't get too hung up on whether the thing you want to do would actually take 5 minutes or 15. If it's more than 6 seconds, we're probably talking about exploration. Exploration is where you as the game master will exert more influence on the pacing. So don't be afraid to like fast forward and skip ahead when you think it'll make things more fun. Think about it like editing a movie. We cut out the boring bits. The third mode is downtime, and is going to vary the most from table to table. Some groups will spend entire sessions, multiple sessions, running around Atari and interacting with the citizens, doing work, shopping, crafting, all sorts of stuff. And other people just got a little tense, merely hearing the idea of spending a full game night like that. I find that downtime is the mode where the players are driving the action the most, and unlike other games, Pathfinder has a robust set of mechanics for it. But it will probably be at least a couple sessions before you really need to worry about that side of things. For the most part, when we're not inside of combat, we're in exploration mode, and that's what is happening when we first enter room 1. The book tells us to ask each player what their character is doing, which I think is smart, but I like taking things one step further and not resolving each action until everyone has announced what they are doing. That way, you can narrate out the consequences in the most narratively interesting way. Say someone decides to look into the hole in the east wall, someone else checks out the shelves on that north wall, the third person investigates the barrels, and the fourth checks the floor for tracks. I probably take the least consequential first. These shelves and those barrels are filled with salt and flour and other just like basic goods you'd expect to find in a larder, and finish with sets of small tracks and some drag marks going into that hole, which looks like something broke through from the other side, just as the rats come pouring out. The book instructs us to have each player character getting attacked by their own giant rat. That's because if all 4 went after the closest PC, that might be the end of that PC. Intelligent enemies might use strategies like this, focus fire, while dumb beasts maybe not, especially if we, the GM, want to take it a little easy on the players at first. Monster tactics are one of the most effective levers you're going to have behind the Game Master's screen to adjust the difficulty of an encounter. We are not trying to kill the characters here. We're never really trying to kill the characters, okay, but a lot of the time, personally, I'm hoping to like almost kill them. But the first time out, we're making sure everyone's got a handle on the 3-action system Pathfinder's become so famous for. Let the players describe what they want to do. I want to walk over here and get on top of this barrel, and then you determine how that works inside the rules. Okay, that's a stride for your first action to get there, and let's say it would be a leap for your second to get up on the barrel. You are now next to one of the giant rats, and you've got 1 action left. Everyone is using their cool abilities for the first time, and everyone else is seeing what they've brought to the table. So I encourage you to encourage the players to really narrate out what they're doing with each attack and spell and ability. Just because initiative gets rolled doesn't mean roleplay stops, and it is wise to get the players into good habits early on before the monsters and the environments start to get more complex and you have less mental bandwidth to coach them. If you have more like strategy-minded or experienced players, there's opportunities here to talk about cover and flanking. If you want to get even more advanced, maybe you've been playing D&D 5e together for a while, but this is your first foray into Pathfinder, you could focus in on all of the things worth looking at for your third action instead of taking that multiple attack penalty. Those little cards are great for getting started, but page 51 in the player's handbook has a lot more actions on it. We could spend a whole video talking about what to do in combat beyond like strike, strike, strike. Let me know in the comments if that's something that you would watch. If enough people express interest, I'd definitely be up for like a deep dive on that stuff. For now, real quick, I'm going to highlight a few actions that you should emphasize for your players when you think they're ready for it. Create a diversion, demoralize, recall knowledge in all of its forms, hide, sneak, take cover, raise a shield. If they are used to a game where you just move into position and attack, it might take a bit before they appreciate all of these possibilities, and when it clicks, I bet it's going to be deeply satisfying for them and deeply satisfying for you to witness. Pretty much all of the players I ran through this were coming with D&D 5e experience, and a conversation we had in both groups was around the fact that most creatures on the monster side and the player side don't have attacks of opportunity, that reaction. And this means you can stride away and move around the battlefield way more. And of course, if you are afraid of that reaction, there is always step. Both of my groups independently came to the conclusion that the characters wouldn't know that, though, so it would be metagaming to take full advantage of that fact. Now, I love that I've got players who are more concerned about what is good for the game and true for the story over like what's best for them. Personally, it's great. I wish that for you. But looking back on it, as I prepared to make these tutorials, I actually figured out that we made a mistake that you don't need to repeat. The added mobility is not only like a strategic benefit to the players, it also makes combat way more interesting and dynamic. Moving out of a monster's range means that on its turn, it will have to spend one of its very precious actions moving to close that distance. And deciding whether or not to move because of a potential attack of opportunity is metagaming. Even if you decide your character wouldn't move because they should be afraid of incurring a reaction, in fact, your character is coming from a world where that wouldn't matter in most fights, so it might not cross their minds to begin with until they start seeing monsters with those types of abilities. Now, I know we're making a real meal out of this first room, but again, this is your opportunity to like onboard everybody to a new system and highlight some of the best practices. I get it, you might want to rush through these rats because you've read all the cool stuff that's waiting down below, but let this one breathe as everyone gets their footing in the game. If you started out by making characters together and then you played out the social encounter with Tamily Tandervale, this might be the climax of your first session and not the beginning of one, and that's okay. Always good to leave them wanting more and to look for opportunities to close out game night on a big beat. I also like looking for cliffhangers. So maybe you want to end the first session with the rodents of unusual size pouring out of the hole to attack, or with the players entering that hole afterwards to find out what mysteries lie on the other side. It's probably a bit early for you to worry about pacing, so don't feel like you've always got to be in control and driving the action. This could take you 2 sessions or 10 sessions to get through, and as long as everybody's having fun and coming back for more, you're doing awesome. Remember, it's the journey, not the destination. So instead of focusing on making progress through the adventure, maybe try to bring more of the adventure into everyday life by getting the players talking about the game between sessions. After this series, I'm going to make a video about one of my favorite ways to accomplish that. It is the best. So make sure to subscribe to the Verdigris Table so you don't miss that. And while we're talking about clicking stuff, hitting that like button really does help this channel grow and is always deeply appreciated. And if you really want to go above and beyond, or you just want to get some cool TTRPG stuff for your games, check out our Patreon, or those affiliate links down in the description, including the cheapest way to get your hands on the beginner box and the core rule book, all sorts of stuff. Big thanks to all of my patrons out there, by the way, for all of your ongoing support. You are what keeps the lights on and this thing going. On Patreon, I also just opened up the first look at our upcoming Kickstarter project, the Game Master's Compendium of Explosive Creativity, so that everybody can get their hands on hundreds of ideas for character motivations, plot hooks, NPCs, magic items, monsters, custom focused on character backgrounds, totally for free. This system-neutral tool is going to help Game Masters easily homebrew adventures around their player characters or adapt published content in a way that makes it feel like each encounter was just like painstakingly custom crafted for your table. Come follow me at r.doyle all over the place for the launch announcement, which is coming soon. All right, so assuming those rats don't kill everybody, eventually the characters are going to make it to the second room. Hooray! It's given that classic descent into darkness and danger and a teaching moment about skill checks. If this came before that combat, I'd say really lean into this demonstration of rolling the d20, consulting the character sheet, finding the modifier, comparing the total to the difficulty class or DC. But even if your players are brand new, fighting those rats probably gave them a pretty good understanding of that. And all they need to see is that skills work the same way. So if you feel like everyone's got like the bare bones basics down, I'd probably make one successful athletics check be enough to get down that mossy cliff. And on a crit, they do so with style. Once everybody gets down there is the time to establish how light and darkness work. Because it's dark in here, baby. Figure out who's got low light vision and dark vision and who doesn't. And I'd even consider writing it down in your GM notes or putting it on your screen. And while we're on that, it's worth recording the character's perception and stealth modifiers as well, as these are going to be like the secret rolls you'll be making for the characters most often. A lot of game masters will have a copy of each character sheet, which is nice, but I like having at least those two big stats handy. I'm going to bet not everyone in the party's got full dark vision, so somebody is going to have to provide some light. Lighting a torch is the go-to answer, especially at early levels, and that means someone is using at least one hand holding it, and that matters because when we go into combat, it takes one action to interact with an object, say to draw a sword or pull out a crossbow. It also takes an action to put something away or stow an object, although releasing it is free. So you can walk around with your crossbow in your hands, but that means you can't be holding a torch or a shield unless you're playing some four-armed homebrewed abomination. If combat pops off and you want to switch to a melee weapon, you can drop your crossbow and unsheath your rapier for only one action, but now your crossbow is on the ground, and if you step or stride or run away before you pick it up again with an action, it's not coming with you. Right here in room 2 is a great place to establish the default for what each character is holding and what they are doing during exploration mode. So there are clear-cut answers when initiative gets rolled. The basic exploration activities are on page 62, and I find it's useful to think of them as like stances your character can be in as they move around. If you talk to your players about how their characters are moving through this area, somebody might say that they are sneaking around with their shield raised, looking out for enemies while searching for traps and secret doors, and good for them, that's smart play, but unfortunately, they are going to have to choose one of those things to focus on. Of course, they can always change what their character is doing, but it is great to have like that baseline default assumption down. This is one of many opportunities to drive home that this is a team game and that the party is going to have the most success and probably the most fun by working together and relying on each other. Each character has different strengths and roles. Leaning into them by like divvying out these exploration tasks is one way to help them shine and feel special. Someone is going to be better suited to scouting and investigating as we go. Detect magic is super useful to have going, and very few characters can do it. And it might be best if the rogue is avoiding notice while the frontline fighter is in defense mode and will already have her shield up if and when something attacks. Another useful thing to get down here is to have a marching order settled. That way we know who is in the front of the pack when they walk into room 3 and meet the giant spider. This is all on the players to decide. If they're brand new, you can do a little bit of coaching if you think it's appropriate, but don't feel like everyone's gotta be playing optimally all the time. The most optimal way to play is to have the most fun, and sometimes playing to a character's weaknesses can be a ton of fun, as can watching them learn the hard way, then evolve and grow. That goes for the players as well as their characters. This spider fight adds saving throws to the mix, as well as difficult terrain. This is a great lesson for any GM to internalize. Adding environmental features to a combat can make things way more interesting. We'll see this again and again in this adventure. There were barrels and columns in room 1, now we have spider webs to negotiate here. The players may or may not interact or take advantage of these things, same goes for the monsters, but it's always good to put some options out there to make a battle feel distinct from the last one. Now, I bet somebody might get the idea to try to clear the webbing in here, especially if they walk in with a torch in their hand. And you'll be forced to decide if they can set all this stuff on fire. If this is your first time as a game master, this could be your first experience making a ruling where there is no clear-cut rule in the book to rely on. Congratulations, it will not be the last. Just use your best judgment. Every game started as somebody's house rules built on the chassis of another game. To my mind, spider webs don't catch on fire so much as just kind of burn away, so I say you can clear a 5-foot square with a torch or a slashing weapon using one action, and the spider 100% knows when you do that. 2 other lessons here in this room. The first is that this fight can be avoided. The game is best when the players have choices on how they deal with the situation. Sometimes the monsters just jump out and attack, sure, but sometimes the players can pacify them by offering them food or opening a dialogue, negotiate an understanding, or simply sneak by without being noticed. Railroading is not expecting the players to go on the adventure you've spent good money and your precious time preparing, despite what some folks out there believe. Railroading is taking away player choice or making those choices meaningless. So if they figure out a creative way to not fight this spider, awesome, good for them. Hope they have a repeat performance on that when they're making their way out of here. The other thing I want to shine a spotlight on is the dead and desiccated kobold cocooned up in the spider silk. It's great to add little details like this to create some interest and make things feel dangerous for sure, but also to foreshadow what is coming next. We've got the fact of the hole in room 1, a trail through room 2, now a body in 3. Leave clues so the players can anticipate what's coming. It's better for story immersion, and they might actually use it to their advantage. They might not, but again, it's about presenting them with choices. Speaking of choices, room 4 gives us our first real choice of direction, left or right. Right is barricaded, and that's telegraphing another piece of information if the players are paying attention. This is probably also a good time to bring up another exploration activity, if the players haven't brought it up themselves yet. Treat wounds. Pathfinder Second Edition is balanced on the assumption that characters are coming into each encounter at just about full health, because with a healer's kit and training in medicine, they pretty much always can. Players might not know that, especially if they're coming from 5e and are used to waiting for a long rest. In Pathfinder, 8 hours of sleep only regains hit points equal to your level multiplied by your constitution modifier, or 1 at a minimum. Now, in this adventure, there isn't really much time pressure, so the characters can spend an hour hanging out, waiting for the cooldown to reset after a failed attempt, or doubling the HP regained on a successful one. And as they level up and the stakes are raised, maybe they won't have that luxury. But right now, I would let them take all the time they need, and I would take that opportunity to ask the players to describe what their characters are doing during that time. We might get a little insight into their habits and hobbies, reveal a little bit more about their personalities, or even that holy grail of running games, an actual in-game conversation between the characters. And that conversation may contain somebody's last words, because if they take down this barrier and go to room 5 without healing up first, it could be bad. Strategy and the dice gods always have an impact, but these undead represent a big spike in difficulty. The characters could be outnumbered here, which is always dangerous, as all things being equal, the side with more actions has a big advantage in a fight. On top of that, the skeleton guards have resistance 5 to piercing and slashing damage, among other things. So if you hit them with an arrow or an axe and do 6 points of damage, you've really only done 1. And if you did 5 points of damage, you actually didn't do any. When that's happening, describe it to the players. The skeleton hardly seems bothered by that arrow because it went through one of its ribs. It shrugs off that axe blow as if it did no harm. But I wouldn't spell out the mechanical details until someone spends an action on recall knowledge, religion, and beats like a 12 or a 13. Recall knowledge is easily undervalued in combat, but figuring out that like slashing isn't the best move on the skeletons, while it is great for the zombie, is definitely worth an action and can turn the tide in a battle. Another potential lesson for the players here is that sometimes the right answer is to run away from a fight. A lot of creatures aren't necessarily going to want to fight to the death, and most are only going to chase characters so far. We're actually explicitly told the spider stays in room 3. This time might be different, though. Somebody, presumably the kobolds, though, maybe it predates them, built that barrier to keep these undead inside of room 5, which implies they could wander out of here if they were able. If the player characters run out of here, I'm guessing they don't have time to, rebuild that blockade behind them. Now you have a decision to make as Game Master. I will say one thing that classically makes undead scary is that they just keep on coming. They don't care about their own well-being. There is no bargaining or undermining morale or intimidating them. If the players run deeper in or try to limp out of here later, are they going to find this fight standing between them and the way out? It's up to you, but I decided skeleton guards were guarding this place. Makes sense, right? Well, that zombie would lumber around if capable. This is a more subjective or stylistic thing maybe, but an optional room with a tough fight in it and some extra treasure is always a good thing to put in a dungeon, in my book. A crypt with restless undead is an easy fit for that, but we'll find other versions of this as we move through Menace Under Otari. Maybe the best lesson here for a Game Master is that sometimes you prepare things that might not get used, and that's okay. It keeps the game centered on player choice, and no prep is wasted since you can always recycle content that goes unused. You can also always modify it to better fit your story. We don't get any information about who these dead originally were or what the significance of that shield is, so maybe there's some connection to one of your character's backstories or the lore of your world. If you're just getting started and the idea of building a whole world is a little intimidating, if not a little exciting, don't worry, you don't have to do anything in that department before running this. If you like to be prepared, though, and you're watching this, so I bet you're the kind of person who likes to make the extra effort, I gotta say, the world of Golarion in the Age of Lost Omens, the default setting for Pathfinder Second Edition, is pretty great. You'll end up making modifications to it to suit your style, and your players' choices over time are likely going to have an impact as well. But you could do a lot worse than checking out some of Paizo's setting guides. There are interesting regions and factions and so much more. The one main criticism it gets is that it's a kitchen sink setting. But the way I see it, that just means there's something for everyone. You can edit it down and curate what you like, which I think is great. Even if you never leave the Inner Sea region or the Isle of Kortos or even the town of Otari, there is a ton of information and inspiration out there. I will warn you, though, it is a deep rabbit hole. We get a little taste of all that lore in room 6, which is also an optional side spur here. This is a shrine to Gozreh, and arguably a puzzle. These magic waters can heal, though there is some risk involved, and the bowl is worth money, but removing it ends that magical effect. Clever players might try to take some of this water with them. You'll have to decide if that works or if the magic fades in a day or two. Your call. Get used to making them. It's part of the fun. I've started having the players make a note of the reference page number when I make up an item for them, and it's been great. You can also make a note for yourself, of course, which is how I used to do it. Also, definitely make a note if someone really gains the favor of or pisses off this deity of nature and the ocean, because you never know when that might become relevant down the road. Now, depending on how you started, how long your game session is, and a bunch of other factors, these first 5-6 rooms could likely fill up your first session, and ending on a cliffhanger as the players spot the kobolds trying to open up that locked storage cage is a great way to end things so you can pick up there next time. That's exactly what we're going to do in this series. Make sure you subscribe to the Verdigris table so you don't miss that as we continue our walkthrough of the beginner box, and consider hitting like, leaving a comment so the ghosts in the machine keep sending this playlist your way in the meantime. I considered making an overview on like the basic game mechanics, but my buddy Anto over on his channel Icarus Games already made a great version of that video. So I suggest you check it out, maybe share it with your players as well. And if you do, tell Anto I said hi. I hope I see you next time. Until then, be kind and have fun.